and get us rolling. I guess, first of all, a good morning or a good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'm Mark Simonson with the Puget Sound Regional Council in Seattle, and I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Socioeconomic Modeling webinar series. As this is our seventh and last planned webinar for 2021, I'm just going to take a few minutes to acknowledge what I see as a very successful group effort of this community to become more active this year. Let's specifically thank MAG staff for all your work kind of initiating this series back in 2020 with the data visualization topics, and then kind of continuing to support the sequel with your staff time and hosting the content on your webpage. I'll drop that link in the chat window here in just a minute so everybody's got it for reference. So thanks, Anubhav, Maggie, Jesse, Scott, anyone else I'm missing. Let's also acknowledge the group of volunteers who've been getting together monthly to plan these webinars out. Thanks for your time. Most importantly, everyone here who's been making the time to attend and participate during this past year. I know, speaking personally, I've sincerely appreciated this opportunity to kind of again interact with this community and talk about the common challenges and goals that we share to build and improve our tools and increase what they can bring to the table, I think, when it comes to the important work that our agencies do. Let's look forward to 2022. We do plan to stay active. I think continuing to hold these webinars quarterly, probably starting in January, is front and center. We received a lot of great suggestions for future sessions earlier this year. So I'm pretty confident that we can continue to have some great discussions, not only in 2022, but beyond. I think there's some hope that depending on how things play out with the pandemic, maybe we'll get a chance to see each other in person. Perhaps the Sandag hosted COG MPO mini conference might be the best opportunity for that to happen if it can resume this summer. We'll see. But I think even beyond that, seeing if we can find other ways to continue to communicate and collaborate would be an important goal to keep. But that's next year. That ties us back to the here and now and today's webinar. So let me welcome and thank our guest presenters joining us today, sharing more details about some of the exciting and innovative projects that they're involved in that bring together multiple agencies and actors around shared goals. So for Activity Sim, we'll hear from Bill Carews and Caitlin Cook of MPO. For the Vision Eval project, we're joined by Jeremy Raw, FHWA, and Tara Widener, Oregon DOT. And for the Zephyr Foundation, we'll have Lisa Zorn speaking from the MTC. Before we get to that, though, what I'm going to do is turn it over to our resident census data expert, Graham, from the Metropolitan Council, for a quick update on the 2020 census products. And then David Tedrow, Sandag, you'll take over for a slightly longer update on the ongoing socioeconomic modeling survey. I think the only administrative thing that I need to touch on is a quick reminder. I think you all should have gotten the message when you logged in that we are recording a session today, so we can add that to the collection on MAG's Peer MPO webinar website. And without further ado, Todd, if you're in the room, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm here. I didn't realize that I was the resident census expert. I guess I should be sending you an invoice for that. I asked Mark just for really 2 or 3 minutes to cover some news that hopefully you're already aware of. First thing, in September, Census Bureau shared its proposal for 2020 census demographic and housing characteristics file. This is what used to be called SF1, but it's now so diminished in its content, they've renamed it the DHC file. So they shared their proposal for the tables list and data schema for this. It will include 169 tables with tract level or block level stats. 169 sounds like a lot, but a lot of those are our specific race iterations. Also, with Census's proposal for this data schema and tables list, it became obvious that they are proposing to eliminate or downgrade 239 tables, and that is a large number, that had been tract level or block level statistics back in 2010. So the overall message is Census is offering or wanting to offer fewer tables, less detail in the 2020 census successor to SF1. All of the detail is I will put it in the chat for you. But I was going to say, if you're in an organization that really relies on some of these former SF1 tables, you have some applied use of it. Census Bureau has opened a comment period that runs from, I think, mid-September through October 22. October 22 is next Friday. And if you wanted to send them comments, don't eliminate this table of tract level data, you could do that. They're inviting those comments through October 22. I will put the links in the chat. Included on the census page that I'm going to provide, there is a downloadable Excel spreadsheet that opens up the proposed table schema side by side with the list of tables that was available 10 years ago. Well, that's everything I had to say. I wanted to bring it up since October 22nd is coming up real soon. And that's what I had for you. Thanks.
Do you get the feeling that they're open to potentially changing their proposal based on the feedback?
Well, I mean, my experience interacting with the Census Bureau during this whole epic experience of 2020 census is that they are expected to open things for public comment, but I don't know how seriously they take it. I've become gradually more cynical the last 3 years about the whole thing. And I don't know where that leaves me in giving you advice. I would say, if you have a strongly held opinion about the necessity of some tables, now is the time to comment on it. I don't know if it'll make a difference or not. It's hard for me to tell from the outside how dug in they are.
Todd, you said tract and block. I mean, given the problems with differential privacy and block data now in general, I guess I feel like that data is already messed up. But I'm concerned about the tract level data being not available. So,
well, yes,
I didn't know
the proposal is that a large number of tables that were available at least the tract level are no longer going to be available at least the tract level. And so that's the thing that I am suggesting people push back against.
They're talking about county level, right? For a lot of them.
Yes, they are proposing some tables will remain, but only with county level tabulations, which isn't real granular where I live.
Tim's got his hand up.
Yeah, this was raised on the SDC listserv, but you know, somebody actually from Massachusetts pointed out, like, I think one angle might be whether there might be an intermediate geography in between tracts and counties. You know, in New England, we can use MCDs. It's not as useful for the rest of the for the rest of the country, but maybe there's maybe one sort of potential way to try to get that is to see if we could, you know, there could be some intermediate geography, which is MCDs or cities over a certain size or something like that, where we could get some of that more granular data, which, there may be good reasons the census doesn't want to put it out at tract level, because like it's going to be really even if they did put it out, I would have a lot of hesitation using it given DAS and my questions about the reliability of the data. So I don't know if folks have looked at it or thought about that as an angle of commentary to the Bureau.
This is Todd Graham again. I since the data became available this fall, we have looked at the DAS processed 2010 demonstration data compared to what was actually published in 2010, and we found that the distortion of tract level data was really very minimal. In fact, census promised that 95 to 100% of tracts you would see very little distortion, and in the Twin Cities region where I work, that is in fact the case. The tract level data looks really pretty good, even processed through the differential privacy regime. But again, what they're proposing with this table schema for the DHC file is clawing back product that was available 10 years ago. So I would like to have some of that tract level, some of those tract level tables still, but I'm not sure how high of a political hurdle this is going to be.
Todd, are you getting a sense of whether it's because of privacy issues that they were supposed to be already kind of resolving by having differential privacy, or whether they think it's data quality, or just even the staffing to put together all these cross tabulations of data?
No, they are explicitly saying it is because of the disclosure avoidance risk that they want to mitigate. They're saying that every additional table that has a cross tabulation of characteristics opens the door for more Sudoku solution of individual characteristics. I'm skeptical of this whole storyline, but that is they are explicitly tying it to they're calling this clawback of tables one of their approaches to limiting disclosure and protecting privacy.
Todd, that analysis you referenced, was that with the September? That's reassuring to hear that the tract level data was good. Was that with the September release of the demonstration data?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, good. Okay.
Census had promised that 95 to 100% of cities and towns data will look minimally distorted. 95 to 100% of tract level data will look minimally distorted, and we did find that to be the case. But then you look at the block level, the most granular unit, and the distortion is enormous. The scatter plots go, cover the whole chart area. And census is explicitly saying, well, don't use blocks. So, Mark, I didn't want to get us too much sidetracked. I hope people take a look at the link that is in the chat, and Census has made this information available there.
Are there particular tables that you are familiar, that already know that you've used a lot in the past that aren't going to be available? When I looked at that file, it takes a lot of work to try and figure out, oh, is this the one that I need? So I didn't know whether you'd already done some of that work for us.
Too long a discussion for me to bring here right now. I can connect with you offline if you want.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'll say thanks, Todd, and thanks everyone for the comments. There's a pretty good, robust chat going on right now in the chat window as well. So in the interest of time, I think we need to transition over to David for his update on the socioeconomic modeling survey. But I encourage everyone to kind of keep going in the chat window here and to follow up again. Like Todd, thank you for offering up on offline follow-ups as well. So David?
Yes, hi. So first, can you hear me? And can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. So what I wanted to do was just give an update on the survey that we sent out and some kind of smattering, some information on some of the results that we've gotten back so far, as well as, what our next steps are and plans for this. Okay, so we sent out a survey about 5 weeks ago, September 8th. It went to 37 agencies, and it was, to say the least, covering, asking questions, requesting information about, I would say, a wide variety of topics related to socioeconomic forecasting, from the size of the population that the agency covers, the plans, dates for the regional plans, to what kind of tools are being used at the region, the sub-regional level, what kind of language is being used, Python, SAS, etc., to please describe, your approach at a very high level to regional level forecast, your approach for allocating that down to sub-regional levels, to, things about budget, staffing, etc., and more, things about what topics are trending, what are new topics that your agency is wrestling with, and so forth. And so, it's difficult for socioeconomic modelers to trim questions because we're so emotionally attached to each one. Every one of those is very, very important to us. So what happens is you have a survey that's probably, too wide, and so definitely makes it somewhat difficult to complete. So for those of you that have completed, I thank you very much. It was not something you can do in 5-10 minutes. It does take some research, some outreach, probably within the agency, across the agency, some time, so a great deal of time. So we really appreciate those that have completed it. To give you an idea, I mentioned 37. The survey went out to 37 agencies. We've received, this was as of end of day Friday, we'd received responses from 14, so just about half. This is kind of their distribution based on the size of the population that they cover. So some small, some medium size. It's a good kind of sampling. The main point here that I want to make is that there is still time to respond. So we're going to, prior to doing our final compilations and our final publishing of results, we're going to wait for responses through basically the end of next week. Okay, and we'll put in the chat window my email address, and I have on the last slide, maybe if you'd like me to resend the survey, maybe you didn't receive the survey, please let me know and I'll be happy to send that. But, so we still would like, another week and a half to try and gather. Our goal is to get over 20, responses from over 20 agencies. Okay. Just kind of, I wanted to also share maybe some sample kind of information from cross-section of the responses. I mentioned one of the questions we asked was, please kind of describe on a general basis your approach for how you generate the region level forecasts. the population, the household, the jobs, what kind of tools used, and so forth. And about half of the respondents mentioned using the tool REMI, but generating employment and population forecasts. I think the key here that was mentioned in various levels of detail is the use of an advisory type of council with internal and external experts, be it demographers or economists or whatnot. These tended to be some of the larger MPOs. In addition, some mentioned using population forecasts provided by some type of state agency. It's most of the, for example, in California, this is somewhat mandated. So those MPOs often cited this. So too did some of the smaller MPOs. The various other things that kind of popped up on some of the responses, the use of headship rates, the vital statistics to generate, trends, the application of labor force participation rate to generate jobs. The key here is that, so let's say we had 4 responses from 14 agencies, which for these metrics we did. So 4 of them mention the use of labor force participation rates. Well, that's good in the sense that if you had these responses, which you will, if you submit yours, you can, if you had questions or wanted to talk with somebody about the application of labor force participation rate, you could identify and reach out and talk to those people. What you don't want to conclude is that, well, these 10 other agencies don't use that. They very well may, but they just didn't mention it on this open-ended description type of question. Okay, so these, the responses will enable you to identify and reach out if you have wanted to speak about certain types of topics. But I would caution on using them in terms of, well, 50% of the agencies use this or do that, because this type of question, you don't really know that, okay? So similarly, we asked kind of the sub-region level, how do you go about allocating down to whatever the lowest level of geography that you do? Not surprisingly, most was mentioned, some type of tool that they're using to generate, to simulate the real estate interactions, as well as utilizing household and employee location models to put those types of agents into units. 4 of the agencies, mentioned, also in addition, mentioned the need to reach out and review the results with local agencies, be it jurisdiction or county or something, and adjust if needed. Some mentioned, needing to make sure the final results are in alignment with certain policies or objectives that the MPO may have. In terms of kind of tools that were mentioned in this question, Urban Sim was mentioned about half. 1 or 2 others in each mentioned some other tools that I've kind of listed there. In terms of another question we asked, kind of the trending, what kind of topics are trending within the agency. And more than half mentioned the desire to improve, or I would say expand the modeling. Maybe it was the land use modeling going from block to parcel, or maybe it was encompassing the output of the travel model back into the land use model. So some type of improvements. Social equity mentioned about half. Also studying of things that are trending recently, be it telework, autonomous or zero emission vehicles, impact of climate change type of things. A few mentioned the expanded, support of expanded scenario planning. Others mentioned, extended primary research, either travel surveys, transit surveys, strategic or sketch planning tools, and so forth. The last kind of question we'll talk about on different responses to different sources of data, demographic data. There weren't too many, not really surprises or anything. From the business data, I was a little surprised how many used Data Axle. It was probably over half of the MPOs mentioned Info USA or Data Axle. The census data is CoStar building data. At least one each mentioned some other data sets, Database USA, Esri, which I think kind of compiles I believe it's the Data Axle data. Then, a few mentioned, hey, we are linked to the output of our travel model. In terms of zone use, land use, it's very much mentioned very, very frequently, some combination of zoning, general plan, parcel, et cetera, as one would expect. Some other ones coming up, Zillow, and then aerial imagery, building type of databases from different sources, and so forth. Okay. And then so the next steps are, like I mentioned, if you received the survey and haven't returned it, never mind that stuff I said about it being difficult to fill in. It's pretty easy, so please take care of that and just send it back. If you didn't receive the survey, please let me know and I'll be glad to send it to you. We're gonna start on, after the 22nd to compile and summarize, and we'll make the results available, both in terms of consolidating and, the counts, and hopefully not only the total, but kind of by some type of size range, as well as providing all of the responses, making the responses available. But all of that is just, you have to send in a completed survey in order to be able to access these responses. Okay, so that's kind of in lieu of prizes, you get the data. So that's what we could afford. All right. So any questions or anything? And, all right. So that was all I had, Mark. If you want to go on, I'm going to try and stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, thanks. I'm just handing it straight over to Jeff for the next segment. So thanks, David.
Great. Thanks, David. And thanks for your hard work in putting the survey together. I encourage all the other MPOs to get that survey filled out and get it to you by next Friday. So I know we're all very excited to hear from our guest speakers. So let's get started. First up are Bill Carews and Caitlin Cook from MPO, the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Bill is the Executive Director and Caitlin is the Technical Programs Director. And they're going to share some of the history of the Activity Sim project with us. Bill, Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to go ahead and take point on this. And Bill is going to provide backup since he has all the historical knowledge. But we did put together just a really quick slide deck to go through the basics of Activity Sim today, and I'm happy to take any questions you all have. So as Jeff said, I'm Caitlin Cook. I'm the Director of Technical Programs, and I'm here with AMPO. And today we just want to share a little bit more about a project we've been working on for several years now called Activity Sim, which, if you're not familiar with it, it is an open platform for activity-based travel modeling. So today I'm just going to run through the high level basics of the mission and principles and really how this project got up and started. I'll share a little bit about the development timeline, what we've done so far and where we're headed, and then get into the project management and implementation of this. So the mission is really just to create and maintain an advanced open source activity-based modeling software. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. To some extent, it was designed originally to be compatible with UrbanSim as well. And it is all open source code. So it's all out on GitHub, and I'll have that link at the end. This activity-based travel model is really used to predict a variety of things. And why we threw this in here for this group, I know a lot of you are already familiar with this, is really just to highlight the fact that this is a shared mission. It's a core mission developed by our project partners. And so it was very important that everybody was driven by the same mission. And with that, similarly, are our principles. So one of the most important principle in this project is the collaboration. We wanted this to be an open, common platform. We wanted the code base to be shareable by all users. And that's really the heart of what this project is. It brought together a variety of MPOs and even DOTs to collaborate on this project and build it together in a very cost-effective way, which is our next principle. By sharing the burden of developing this project, our partners were able to reduce the development and maintenance costs considerably. We'll get into the actual costs in a little bit, but everybody as a project partner, which you'll see kind of at the footer of the presentation, they all pay a set amount to be a part of this project and really help guide the development. It's also a really practical way of approaching something like this. It's really easy for agencies and modelers with a variety of skill levels to use it. If you are interested in it, the code's out there, you can go grab it, you can stand it up within your own agency. If you want a user group, you can join the consortium and have a ready-made user group to lean on as well. It can also be customized and extended with new features and region-specific needs. So while the base code is shareable, people are able to customize on top of that. And it's just an efficient use of computing resources, including memory, storage, and processors. So again, the mission and the principles, those are all driven by the consortium members. AMPO and specifically the AMPO Research Foundation, which I'll get into in a moment, we're really just here to facilitate this. All of this is being driven by the consortium members themselves. And with that, this is the list of our current activities and partners. So you'll see we have several MPOs, primarily large, and then we also have a couple DOTs. We have Oregon and Ohio DOT. And one thing I want to note on this, while AMPO is a member-based organization, several of our activities and partners are not AMPO members. So it's not a requirement. This is just a product that we saw a need for in the community, and we were happy to step in and help facilitate its creation. So with that, I mentioned that our agencies contribute annually into this pooled fund, and that's $35,000 a year. And what that does is that really gets them a seat at the table. That allows them to sit down and help build the scope for the project, review the RFP and review the proposals that come in, and then guide the project. This group meets twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's pretty extensive. But they have a lot of opportunities to guide that development and decide what components of the model are going to get built first. A note on that, we do have the AMPO Research Foundation. It's a 501c3, and it's really how we administer this activity sim project. So there is one MOA that covers the entire project and consortium, but then we break off and we actually do individual funding agreements through AMPORT with each consortium member. And we do those on an annual basis, our fiscal years, July to June. AMPO staff, so myself and Bill, we really facilitate this coordination and we provide administrative support. And we're actually in the process of hiring a coordinator, a technical coordinator, where they will have a dedicated amount of time, up to 10 hours a week, to work on this project as well. So all the administrative stuff behind a project like this, from keeping the MOA up to date, keeping track of all the funding agreements and the invoices, and just all the project management that goes into it, AMPO staff is really responsible for that. Like I said, all the funding agency partners participate in decision making, and we're always looking for new agencies, new member organizations that, again, don't have to be an AMPO member. And overall, this has been about an 8-year project. So it is 8 years of continual collaboration, which can be challenging at times, but I will say coming into this project, I've been very impressed with how well the consortium members coordinate and collaborate with each other and compromise and create shared scopes that are beneficial to all of their regions.
Hey, Caitlin, before we move on, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points, if that's okay. So I think there's a couple of important lessons learned in here, and I certainly would invite the other agency partners that I see on the line with us to step in and chime in. With regard to the MOA and the individual funding agreements, the previous structure and model that we had in place was such that the MOA also served as the fiscal agent. And so we ran into a little bit of an issue where when we wanted to add a new partner to the consortium, that MOA needed to be sent around to every single agency for signature and sign off. And that could be a little bit of an onerous and time consuming process. And so by removing the fiscal piece out of that MOA, we were able to keep that in place and then just have the funding agreement be one-on-one between AMPO and said partner. And so that allowed for a little bit more of an efficient and effective process in terms of onboarding and bringing new partners into the fold. So just a little bit of a lesson learned, and we have now fully transitioned away from just a single MOA and into these two different agreements. And we're already seeing the benefit of that. And so just wanted to flag that. The other piece here is Caitlin had mentioned the July 1 fiscal year. And so AMPO and the Research Foundation used to operate on a calendar year fiscal year. However, a number of our agency partners, not only for ActivitySim, but a number of our member organizations operate on a July 1 fiscal year. And so with ActivitySim, we were running into a little bit of a cash flow budgeting and scoping issue because cash was coming in, over the course of the year, mainly at either January 1 or July 1. And so it kind of made budgeting and scoping a little bit challenging. And so AMPO made the decision to just go ahead and align our fiscal year with that of the consortium partners and with the majority of our members and switched to July 1. And so with ActivitySim specifically, that made the budgeting and scoping process a lot easier and a lot more effective and efficient. So just wanted to mention a couple of lessons learned there.
Thanks, Phil. And so with that, I do want to share just a really short, kind of concise timeline with the group for those of you who aren't familiar with the history of ActivitySim. So the AMPO Research Foundation was created back in 2013, and this is really when the original MOA between the first 3 agencies was created, and that was with MTC, ARC, and SANDAG, and the first RFP was released. Development really began in 2014 and continued over the next 4 years, and we saw our first implementation of ActivitySim begin in 2018 at ARC. And so they are trucking along. They've made a lot of progress and they're getting ready to move into full production with this actually. And then in 2020, another kind of milestone I wanted to highlight was our RFP actually shifted to a bench of contractors. And I think this is something to point out on a kind of a pooled fund project like this that I think is really innovative and helpful to the partners in that we have 3 consultants now on contract. It's Cambridge Systematics, WSP, and RSG. And those 3 all work on the current phase. So we were able to put out an RFP and look at the proposals that they provided to that. And the partners were really able to kind of pick and choose the components that they liked from each consultant. And by having that bench of contractors, we feel it's a little bit more equitable on how the project is being built. But it also creates a really healthy competition amongst the private companies to really put out their best and brightest and work together. And it just compounds on that collaborative nature of the project. So that's something we've recently shifted to in the last year that I think has been really beneficial to the project as well. And we've continued to pick up partners along the way. We are currently at 10 partners and always on the lookout for more. We are currently finishing what we call phase 6B, and we're getting ready to begin phase 7. And we do those scopings about a year out or so, and our project chair really leads that. I'm going to pause here, Bill, and see if you have anything you want to add to the history of the project.
No, I don't believe so. Are we allowed to share our newest partner that we just confirmed as of last week? I think it's okay. Yeah. I'm told the paperwork is in place. So yeah, as of last week, we were able to bring in Miami-Dade and Southeast Florida into the consortium as well. So we're really excited about that and look forward to onboarding them and getting them more involved. But I think this is a good overview of the timeline. And again, I'd certainly invite any partners that are on the phone with us to add anything that we may have missed.
And I will say one thing to point here that I think is really important to emphasize is MPO is really just the collaboration space. My understanding, so 2013 was prior to me joining MPO, but my understanding and talking to partners was this was really kind of a back of the napkin conversation at a meeting. I think it was a TRB meeting of some sorts, where folks got together and said, hey, there's this need, we really need this. We're all kind of in the same boat. And from that grew this project. And I think that's something to emphasize. This isn't an AMPO project per se. It's not something top down. This is something that our partners identified as a need in the industry. And we were just lucky enough to be able to provide that space and coordination to create it. So we pride ourselves in being very partner driven. We let the consortium decide the direction of the project, and we're simply there to help administrate it. And with that, the activity sim project management, I mentioned earlier that AMPO staff does handle the project management through our research foundation. And AMPORF, just a side note, I know a lot of you, all of you really handle federal money. AMPORF is an audited organization. We comply with all federal funding regulations. So we're very familiar with having to deal with the different colors of money and cobbling that together into an effective project. We are led by a project management committee, a PMC, and that's comprised of agency staff from our partners. And that PMC really sets the development priorities and provides the technical direction and oversight. So I am in no way a modeler. I don't pretend to be a modeler, neither does Bill. This PMC is instrumental in the technical side of things and making sure that this project is built to the highest of standards. And we're very lucky to have a PMC chair as well, Joe Castiglione, that is a great leader and really helps wrangle all of this together. Also, the project management involves just kind of implementing advanced state of the practice features. So that gets back to, our PMC. They are always on the lookout for the best to put into this, and identifying and developing capabilities to respond to new policy and investment analysis needs. Again, we meet twice a week on this, sometimes 3 times a week if a partner meeting is scheduled. There is so much coordination and development going on, it's hard to keep up. And we do our scoping and budgeting on an annual basis. So that 6B7 phase that I discussed earlier, that's something we do annually. So we don't go so far out in the scope that we can't be nimble in responding to any sort of emerging needs. And with that,
and Caitlin, I just wanted to mention that too. Oops, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention 2 more quick points. And I think you sort of mentioned this as we were walking through the earlier slide, but I think another important and new development as of this year is that the project has now reached a point where the Activity Sim Consortium and AMPO have agreed to share the cost of an employee. And so we'll be splitting hours of that new employee, which we are in the process of hiring for, between Activity Sim, solely dedicated to staffing and supporting Activity Sim, and then helping a little bit on the AMPO side as well. And so that's an exciting and new development as the project continues to evolve. And then one other point is just that AMPO truly is a pass-through for this project. We are certainly not here to make any money off of it. We simply just take a little bit off the top to cover the administrative costs. And that's averaged out to about 7% annually off of the total revenue. So really just a minimal cost off the top, and then the rest goes directly to the project. So I just wanted to point those couple of things out.
Yeah, And with that, I'm just going to leave you with our contact information. You'll see Joe's listed here as well as our GitHub repository if you're not familiar with it. And I can share these slides. I'm sure many of you already have our contacts, but I can share these with Jeff and make sure that you all have access to them as well. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I saw the chat seems to have some activity going on. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was a great presentation, and Bill. I think we're going to defer all of the questions to the Q&A session at the end so we can get through all of the presentations. So if that's okay with everyone, we're going to move on to the second presentation. Next up is Jeremy Raw, a community planner with the Systems Planning and Analysis team at the Federal Highway Administration, and Tara Widener, Climate Impact Analysis Program Manager at the Oregon DOT's Climate Office. They're going to give us an overview of Vision Eval. So take it away, Jeremy.
Jeremy, I think you're on mute.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
You're good.
Let's see. Yeah, so let's try that again. So I'm currently the project manager for the Vision Eval Pooled Fund. We'll talk about that organization in some depth. I'll wink at Tara and say I told her I wasn't going to use slides, and then I found some good slides, so I'm going to use those. Just because I think it'll help people visualize a little bit of what's going on. I was going to talk about this narratively, and I realized the history and structure of the project is a little bit complicated, and so having some pictures will be useful. On my first slide here, I'll draw your attention to the bottom row that says U.S. Department of Transportation Sharp 2 Solutions and Travel Works, which is an AASHTO project that I think is sort of a little bit in limbo at this point to try and deliver travel analysis tools. That was an outgrowth of Sharp 2 as well, the Strategic Highway Research Program. So what I'm going to do with Vision Eval, let's just see, yes, it is going here, is describe a little bit about what Vision Eval is. I mean, I note that some of our partners are on this call. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Tim. Probably some others I didn't see out there. Vision Eval is a strategic model. It's designed as a complement to traditional travel demand models that you can use earlier in the planning process at relatively low cost for implementation and analysis, to look at different strategies and different approaches that may then become guideposts for developing more specific projects and an approach to achieving specific goals. The emphasis in the model is on strategy. It focuses on household economics and looks at what happens to people's travel behavior in terms of the response to different things happening. So unlike a regional demand model, for example, activity center we just talked about, Vision Eval is about trying to understand transportation system inputs, examining the response of households to those inputs, and then computing changes in behavior that will show up in VMT, greenhouse gases, other emissions, congestion delays, cost impacts on households, who wins, who loses. So it's used for equity analysis and other things like that. I'll talk briefly maybe later about equity analysis. The emphasis in Vision Eval is on a spectrum of metrics. The idea is to give you an easy way to draw a picture of what might happen with different, mostly policy interventions. You can do project interventions, but not really in any geographic detail. So we can look at like ITS improvements, incident management improvements, things like that, and think, how would this actually reflect in terms of the changed experience of the transportation system by households? The model is actually actually modules, I'll use plural, fairly sophisticated, looks at complex interactions among a variety of different inputs and interactions among metrics. The key thing here is to look at scenarios, to be able to evaluate ranges of different alternative policies, examine wins and losses, trade off things that would be effective versus things that would be politically feasible, since usually those two don't come together. The project itself that we're currently engaged in is run through a pooled fund, and I'll get to the details of that in a second. Our idea is to try and create a user-friendly tool, broadly available to people, open source, not encumbered by licensing restrictions or limitations on what you can do with it, And there are certainly complexities with that. And I think Tara's going to talk about how we've tried to navigate that particular ownership question. The current project is funded by states and metropolitan planning organizations, and it's an outgrowth of deployment funding that Federal Highway put forward with AASHTO through AASHTO a couple of years ago, actually more than a couple of years ago, back in 2014, 2015, 2016, that established Vision Eval as we know it. And the pooled fund has carried this forward with a series of development initiatives to try and continue improving the tool, making it more available, and improving documentation and so on. The key mission of the pooled fund is to maintain the open source liberal license. Anybody can use this and try and do it, so we don't want it attached to particular contractors. We don't want it attached to particular agencies. So I'll go through a little bit about the past. I mean, the origins of this thing, if we follow it back to the beginning, was the Green Step model developed in Oregon by Brian Greger in 2008 through 2010, trying to respond to a statewide initiative there to reduce greenhouse emissions by 70%. A very aggressive goal. And of course, the question is, how the heck could we do that? We want everything on the table. The model was set up to evaluate lots of different combinations of alternatives to see what would work. And then getting back to what I described before, what's politically saleable. I mean, there are things we could do that nobody would accept in terms of limiting travel or limiting types of vehicles or whatever. And so Green Step was going to try and thread that needle. Following on to that, Green Step was done at the statewide level. The ST in Green Step is sort of statewide, at least in my construal of it. The model actually was refined to work at a metropolitan level, and all of this work was done at Oregon DOT. So RSPM emerged from that, the Regional Strategic Planning Model. Two other offshoots happened at roughly the same time. RPAT, the Rapid Policy Analysis Tool, was a direct product of SHARP 2. Green Step had been appropriated as a platform to develop a demonstration model that then got reabsorbed into the Vision Eval project. Likewise, the Federal Highway Office of Natural Environment developed the Energy and Emissions Reduction Policy Analysis Tool, which was really intended to be Green Step for states other than Oregon. And that has had its own development trajectory. It is not currently part of the Vision Eval project, but forms part of this larger constellation of developing the tools. The current pooled fund is actually was assembled in 2016, originally with 7 states and 3 MPOs. We have status of a couple of these states. Maryland gave us money at the beginning, and then the key person there left the position that he was in, and they've been inactive. Caltrans gave us money for this, but it's not clear to me that they've actually picked up and used the product. Ohio DOT, same story. But we do have active members as well. NCDOT has been dabbling in it. We're going to be coming back to them. Oregon, of course, has obviously been using this consistently. Virginia has been very active in pilot projects, as has Washington State DOT. MPOs, our original partners, ARC, Houston Galveston, the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, whose executive director was very interested in Vision Eval and is now the executive director of HGAC, the MPO. So they've kind of merged and collapsed a little bit. We recently added SANDAG and MAPC to the crew, and we're working on implementations specifically of the VERSPM model in each of those places. The way that we've organized this, and I'll flip to my next slide, is through a pooled fund using a mechanism that was established by Federal Highway to support state DOTs combining their resources to pursue particular research projects. There are, probably active now dozens of pooled funds involving many states, most of them revolving around things like, improved asphalt performance techniques and, bridge structural stuff and things that are really related to actually building roads. There have been a crew of these that are involved in planning efforts. Another one, and I'm just going to flip over, I think this will show up on my shared screen, to another pooled fund that we're running, the EGIST project, that is working with a bunch of states to establish standards, practices, tools for applying GIS and managing that at an enterprise level across the state. So that's another big one that we're involved in Federal Highway. The reason that we took on the pooled fund approach, and originally the idea here was to try and gradually devolve the SHARP 2 support that Federal Highway had been doing, because of course the funds for that are essentially exhausted at this point. and try and bring in interested parties to continue the development of the system and making it available and providing technical support and so on. We started out with a 3-year pooled fund. We've extended it now, so it'll be running at least through 2022, and we may have an option for another extension beyond that. It's an easy way for agencies to pay, and I'll mention the prices. I don't think I have it on the slide. States have been giving us roughly $25,000 a year for the pooled fund. The MPO partners, we had asked for 15, and that's negotiable. Some are giving us a bit more than that. Some are giving us less. And from that, we've assembled essentially the ability to contract out some of the code development, documentation development for the system. We're about to launch the phase 2 contract for that. We got a little bit delayed due to some bureaucratic snafus within Federal Highway. One of the catches always of working with us on a pooled fund is if we're the lead agency, you have to follow federal procurement rules, which are Byzantine complex and sometimes go off the rails. So we're back on track with that. The reason Federal Highway ended up in charge of this was for 2 purposes. One, it gives us access to internal resources. We provide a lot of in-kind support. My own job, 30-something% of it is actually spent on Vision Eval development, organizing the pooled fund and managing it. We also have an internal contract with the Volpe Transportation Center to provide technical support in implementing pilot projects, helping us with documentation, and managing the pooled fund in different ways. So a lot of this comes from Federal Highway. We're able to do that as a lead agency within the pooled fund. I guess we could probably manage some of this even if we weren't the lead agency. So we're still looking for new members. Anybody out there who thinks, oh, this might be interesting, feel free to talk to me after the meeting. Get in touch. We'd be happy to recruit new folks. All of this gives us more leverage for doing new things. Things that are coming up in the next version of the pooled fund, we'll be looking at expanding use of local household travel surveys as ways of estimating what happens in the future with Vision Eval. We'll be looking at things like, population synthesis. That happens in Vision Eval, but it also happens in Activity Sim. Wouldn't it be neat if we could move that stuff across? We have some pilot efforts to move stuff from Urban Sim into Vision Eval as the basis for household estimates. We'll be implementing that and making that a more general purpose capability of the tool. All of this is intended to make it more flexible, more accessible to people, helping you get the results of Vision Eval without necessarily duplicating resources. So that's my little advertising pitch. There's a slide here of other things, but I'll say that's pretty much it. Maybe I'll look back to my co-presenter, Tara. Is there anything you were expecting me to say about this that I haven't said? And you can ask me a question and I will answer that. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it on to you to talk a little bit about what is this product? How is it owned and governed? What are we trying to do in terms of the relationship? Obviously, the pooled fund, and before I ask Tara that question again, I'll say one other thing I did forget. The pooled fund is intended as a funding mechanism. So what we've got here is essentially a replacement for the MOA business that Caitlin and Bill were talking about for AMPO and Activity Sim. We already had that apparatus available through the Federal Highway-wide pooled fund mechanism. It has funding advantages for state DOTs who can spend planning resources without having to come up with a local match. So there are a lot of cool things about the pooled fund. Definitely worth considering if the bulk of the members are in fact state DOTs. One of the downsides is our MPO partners, as many of them know, they send us checks and they get lost in the bureaucratic shuffle because we're really intended. I mean, the program was set up doing transfers of money through the agency-wide state DOT financial system. MPOs aren't part of that. So we've had a little bit of a wrinkle with that, which I think mercifully we've resolved. We haven't lost a check recently, so and we've always been able to find them. But that's the pluses and minuses. There is a bigger question about what exactly the pooled fund is managing, and I think that'll be Tara's piece of the conversation. So I'll stop there. Tara, anything you want me to say? Otherwise, I can hand it on to you.
No, I think you did a great job of talking, a bit about the tool, but broadly how the pooled fund operates. And I would totally echo that some of the value of the FHWA being host is some of the things you mentioned, that you have found a lot of matching funds, that your role is a lot of that program management and getting us all together. And so that, appreciate that. And then the Volpe technical side of things. So I know you can operate these FHWA pooled funds in a number of ways with a number of lead agencies. This is how, we've been structuring it here, which really takes a load off, any one agency to do that, and also gives us opportunities to connect to funding and so forth. I was going to share a little bit more about how we arrived here. That kind of, I think, complements what Jeremy has said. So let me pull up these slides. Do you guys see my slides here?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. So just, I have two slides here. One is a little bit our random walk to get here, which I think elucidates some of the comments and where you guys are at and trying to figure this out. And then I'll go a little bit more into sort of champions and how that structure helped us get to where we're at. So I think Jeremy's talked about, we started out with this sort of family tree that was growing, and instead of we wanted to bring that back together. So how do we start sharing that more broadly? And that coincided with a lot of things happening that we started to see that other people were interested in this tool. We had users out there, and then we had sort of, unmet needs and some new mandates at different states, or people interested in GHG. We had the SHARP program, moving on and wanting to find a home for some of this. And so we wanted to identify this common need and for the home for this new tool. So that was sort of setting the stage. And then to develop that, I think it really involved a lot of champions. So you guys are sitting at the table and you are champions for your different elements of this, but we also, wanted to tap into, FHWA, we wanted to tap into, the research community and into some of the consultants and so forth. So I'll talk a little bit about that core of group to take ownership. And you really needed a person in each of those to sort of come to the table and sort of talk about their interest and butt up against the others and come up with something that was better than they came to the table, even envisioning. And then I think there's also, this is where we also are in common. So I know we were a very technical tool, but we also wanted some communication. And so we wanted to do things that were collaborative in nature. And I feel like we're still moving in this direction, which is, some peer exchanges, some pilot work, proof of concept, and starting to share, how we're using the tool, how it's helping us with answering those questions, that sort of collaboration and trying to involve others. And then I think the other development end was funding. So, we needed to be creative in getting to this funding. So, we've talked about the SHARP 2 program. We've talked about leveraging FHWA. ODOT was interested in moving this tool forward, but not being the owner of it. So we've got a lot of credibility by having this group and FHWA in there. So the pooled fund obviously helped us as we collaborated little bits of money into something that could do a lot more. We've been connected to the TMIP in terms of forums where we can reach out and so forth. And trying to get to, even some of us have pulled off to the side of the pooled fund and proper and said, well, we're states, the rest of these guys are MPOs, are not interested in this, but we want to add this to the tool. So there's been these sort of off to the side connections that might have MOAs or IGAs that are not formally part of the main part. So just a number of things that were happening to us as we went through this. And then the last where I would end is with these champions. So I think, I sit in this upper right circle over here where I'm a state, wanting to leverage others. So I really wanted this efficiency. I wanted sort of the credibility. I wanted some cost savings. I wanted to share best practices, but I needed to bring these other people along, and they had different approaches. So FHW comes here and they're not necessarily caring as much about efficiency and maybe even sharing practices. They want a national tool. They want to create possibilities for all users to come forward. They want it to be user friendly, which might not be my personal thing. I'm a little more technical, so I could open the box. I don't need a fancy GUI. So anyway, they're bringing those kind of perspectives to the table. Consultants are trying to sort of sell products, right? So why do they want to go in an open source product? They want to develop and apply. They have multiple clients to serve. They're not really excited about legacy code issues, but so that's their angle. And then you get to the academics, and this is where the innovation comes in, and we wanted to bring that tool. And so how do you bring them under the tent? Well, they were interested that when they apply these do their research, that they have a national tool that applies to not just their, city of Portland research, but has more broad applicability. And they can help with data sets, and they, want it to be modular and code standards so they can pull out their pieces. So I think any one of these people is very different, but it's the uniting of all of these perspectives that really helped us. And I think our structure through the pooled fund has satisfied a lot of these things, maybe not all of them yet. But I think, it's important to know kind of that, and I actually talk about this as constructive dissonance, because we don't all agree, and we would all go in different ways, but I think there is really a value and almost something better than we come to the table with our individual perspectives. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy and Tara. We're getting a lot of great information today. Our third presenter this afternoon is Lisa Zorn. She's the Assistant Director of Planning for Forecasting, Modeling, and Surveys at MTC in San Francisco. Lisa is going to share her experience with the Zephyr project. Lisa, take it away.
All right, share. There we go. Good. Oh, it's just afternoon now. So good afternoon, everyone. And it's good to see some familiar faces, especially since where MTC is also part of one of the activity sim partners. So we're excited about that project as well. And the Zephyr did give a Zephy award to Vision of Val. So all these speakers' presentations are pretty intertwined here. So I'm going to talk about Zephyr, the Zephyr Foundation, and I'm a board member on the Zephyr Foundation. I was less involved during its inception, so I got some notes from some of the instigators on this. So I'll do my best. But also feel free to correct me, anyone here who does happen to know, because I know there are a lot of people involved over the years, and so I'm happy to be corrected. Okay, so I was asked to touch on the origins of Zephyr, successes, challenges, and ideas about collaboration, funding, contracting, and project management. And my understanding is that this group is, thinking about it in terms of seeking a home for something, although I'm not, I think maybe that I'm not sure exactly the details of that. So I tried to touch on things that I thought would be relevant for that. So the Zephyr origins were, I believe, in about 2015. A lot of the Zephyr Foundation stories come from TRB annual meetings, as well as the planning applications and ITM conference meetings, is where a lot of this conversation got started. So my understanding is the very earliest sort of ideas of Zephyr came from around 2015 at a TRB annual meeting. There was a committee meeting in which folks were talking about how to improve their discussion. And I think there was a presentation by weather forecasting researchers, which was influential. In the 2016 TRB annual meeting, there was a relevant discussion on travel modeling as a science. And then in 2016, a set of instigators convened a set of founding stakeholders to decide how to form a nonprofit, what the mission and values would be. And the founding stakeholders and the instigators are listed on the website in case you're curious about that. The 2016 ITM meeting had a presentation from Dave Ori, who I think he was then my boss, and this was one of his slides on that to get the conversation moving. So this was before Zephyr was actually created. So this was more a sort of a brainstorming to develop, I think maybe the mission and vision and goals were developed or at least iterated on at this meeting. And then by 2017, I think that's when it became a nonprofit, and the instigators conducted a workshop to develop project ideas. After that, there's been a movement in different areas, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the mission did evolve to become this statement right here: to advance rigorous transportation and land use decision-making for the public good by advocating for and supporting improved travel analysis and facilitating its implementation. So this is very, very texty and I won't read it, but I thought it was relevant because the vision and the goals, you know, if they're in line with the kinds of things that you all are looking for, I figure that's relevant. And it seems to me like they probably are based on my understanding of what's important to this group. But these are all posted on the website as well. I just wanted to make sure that this was in here somewhere because I think it's super relevant and important. So the Zephyr activities that we're working on, we have each of these activities has a committee or a project management group associated with it. There's the workforce development program, and that includes, we have Zephy awards that we collaborate on. We have committees, we ask for nominations, and actually nominations for the Zephy awards for January are open now. So we're looking for nominations. And we have a committee who selects the award winners. We have blogging and Slack communication, although sometimes that's a bit iffy because it can be a little tricky to get folks engaged on new communication mediums. And we did do a series of virtual learning sessions in the first half of 2020, which was great. We have some projects that are ongoing, like the network data standard and management tools. And I think Jeremy Moraw has been very engaged in that particular project. We have the software badging project, which is a group of us, and I'm involved in that one. We look at open source software tools and try to sort of evaluate them and write about them in terms of whether they contribute to the industry, how valuable they are, just to have some sort of evaluation so that when folks are looking at these tools and they're like, I don't know, is this worth using? Is this worth diving into? It can be that just figuring that out is work. And so we're trying to have a group of folks that, voluntarily do this for projects that get submitted or projects that we self-nominate because we think are important and things that we use. So that's software badging. Open science is a little bit, it was sort of stalled out for a while, but I think it's reviving. And that is a project that is focused on making it, ensuring, or maybe encouraging, not ensuring, encouraging folks who are publishing papers and publishing literature to put more of their sort of code and data and be as transparent as possible so that other people can maybe reproduce or even iterate on that research. And so and I think that's just an idea that some folks are interested in because it can be hard to get those research projects out of sort of this research silo and into application, and also to get more collaboration moving between researchers and other researchers and folks that are applying the research. Their GTFS, I didn't put that on the slide, I'm sorry. GTFS Ride is another project which I didn't put on the slide because I'm not sure if it's active. I should probably have figured that out, but I'm not entirely sure if it's an active project, but it's a data standard project. Fast Trips is a project that I am the project chair for that one. And that is a software project that came out of a Sharp 2 grant and a number of agencies. We were collaboratively developing a transit passenger assignment or dynamic transit passenger assignment and skimming software. It sort of never really got out of the research phase into application. We're trying to keep the interest and the momentum going, but it's been a little bit of a struggle. And then I think finally, the count and data management tool, that's a project that's listed on the website, but I do not believe that is active or started yet. That is more of a sort of something of interest. So you can see it's kind of an evolving list, the things that we're involved in based on who can contribute, who's able to push things forward. Being a volunteer-run organization makes it so that there tend to be sort of starts and stops to these things, and sometimes they move faster and sometimes they move slower, and so we kind of have just try to be flexible about it, and from time to time have discussions about what we should do about existing projects if they're okay, if they need an infusion of something, etc. So it's always evolving. Challenges and ideas about collaboration. I sought some input about this from fellow board members. And I didn't want to put bullets here because it would be super texty and not that interesting to put bullets, but the sort of input I've received and also from my own experiences is that with these getting the projects off the ground and keeping them running, it does require continuously sustained effort. And sort of, I think as other folks before me have mentioned that I think projects need a few champions who are able to put in the time to draft a work plan and see collaborators and execute the work plan. And that's difficult in some situations, because we all have full-time jobs, and if we, it can be difficult when other priorities are kind of getting in the way to really help these things move forward. So that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of things could stall out. So we now anticipate that projects will move in fits and starts, and it helps to be able to plan for regular check-ins to keep the momentum going. It helps to not get discouraged if the project languishes, and we'll just keep continuing and seeing what we can do. We did try to hire a staff person, a part-time staff person, to help with these issues, but we weren't successful in that. I think because we kind of had all these constraints that made that very difficult. We were looking for some domain knowledge, fundraising, and administrative support, and those are very specific asks, and that kind of magic combination of traits did not appear, which is not to say that we've given up on that. We might still try again. It's sort of something to be continued. And on funding, contracting, and project management, we were successful in attracting a small but loyal membership base. So we have a little bit of funding that pays for regular admin costs, annual meetings, the awards, sort of the activities that we reliably do now, and some of our small IT costs. But it has been challenging to grow the membership, especially recently with COVID and funding getting sort of tight. So that's something that we have to sort of reinvestigate, especially because we were hoping to have more agency memberships, and I think we're going to have to iterate on how to effectively do that. And that was definitely something that COVID affected. And let's see what else. We have done a grant application to fund one of our projects. We weren't successful with that particular application, but we could, we're certainly open to trying more. So that's a funding opportunity. I believe Zephyr has contracting ability, but we haven't done a lot of contracting to date. As far as I know, we haven't done contracting to date, but there's no reason that we couldn't. But this is one of those things that having a staff person would probably help with. And yeah, I think that's all the relevant notes that I have right now. So with that, I will wrap it up. And the only thing I have here is the website, which has a fair amount of this information. So feel free. Oh yeah, and also board member nominations are also open right now. So happens to be a bit of an active time for us. All right, stop sharing.
Well, I think I'm supposed to take it from here. Is that right? So I'm Ben Gruswitz from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission in Greater Philadelphia's MPO. And I just want to thank all our presenters today. Really awesome to get insights on sort of the ins and outs of your organizations and products and whatnot. And I think the reason why we were trying to invite you all today was less so on the ins and outs of like what the tools do or what specifically the details of everything is, other than the fact that as many of you alluded to, we're kind of having this conversation now as Mark kicked it off, kind of with a recap of where we've been. We find ourselves, I think, actually the pandemic has been probably good for us in that it's allowed for this regular kind of check-in and forum for gathering, and that we probably haven't experienced as a community before. And I think a lot of our examples of organizations and tools come a lot from the travel model area, because I don't know, I'd be interested in people's ideas of why travel modeling has so much energy in organizations and models behind it. Might be a lot to do with money and what kind of funds it brings into your different agencies, but land use modeling and socioeconomic modeling are sort of a related thing to transport modeling, but it also can be somewhat its own thing, as well as interrelated with other models. And even Jeremy alluded to that there's some people trying to work on integrating urban sim with vision eval. MAPC did a study with that, and DVRPC is now kind of working on an effort with that. And I think we're all trying to look for a home for this group and really capitalize on what's been happening in this last year and take this momentum and do something with it. And so I think that led a lot of the organizers of these webinars to kind of say, well, what if we just start gathering and hearing from people who have done something collaborative across multiple agencies. I'm going to read something that Mark had put out on an email earlier, just to give you, I think it frames well both, what we're looking for, and somewhat, it's still nebulous. We're still trying to figure out what we're looking for. But he said, we're interested in establishing and maintaining some sort of structure that lowers the barriers and increases the likelihood of collaborating on the challenges we share in model building and use. Goals for such a structure could include finding out a way to support pooled funding and research and development work, having a platform for exchanging knowledge and sharing innovations, having regular communications, and assembling a roster of our peers, organizations, and individuals who work on socioeconomic modeling. And underpinning all of that, sort of finding a shepherd to keep it all organized. And as I listen to the different presentations we've had, I think the shepherd or the champion and even the administrative end of it all kind of is one of those pieces that I think frequently got touched upon. All these presentations too, I think we all have an interest in being aware of them if we're not aware of them yet. But also there could be potentials for doing something similar or joining on to a group. I don't know if we're quite to the point of creating a model collaboratively yet, like an activity sim, but it could be something that a group like this could think about, and doing that sort of open source model that benefits a number of us down the road. So I guess one thing I'd put to our different presenters is, what do you think is available to us, and is there a home? I'd say there's probably not a home exactly other than collaborative and interchange with vision eval, but AMPO probably has some interest groups beyond activity sim. And I know there's some GIS practitioners that meet and things like that. And even maybe I'll start with you, Lisa. I mean, is there a home at Zephyr Foundation for socioeconomic modelers?
That's a good question. I mean, I believe that folks at the Zephyr Foundation are definitely interested in this space. I think it was notable that that the mission was not restricted to just travel modeling. But I also think with Zephyr, we're very sort of, once folks sort of create their project or their committee, whatever it is, there's, it's pretty free flow, like very up to the project management committee, how they want to run that sort of thing. And so it's very flexible. And I think the different committees do have a pretty varied approach. And then the ones that I'm involved in, I think some of them have more momentum than others, but I think it's useful in that, if you were to come under the Zephyr umbrella, I think that flexibility means that you could take some time to figure out where you wanted to go. Hopefully it would help everyone connect with other folks who are involved in Zephyr. I think there's a lot of an interest in Zephyr from more sort of junior folks, and the workforce development program aspect of it might be have a good synergy. I don't like words like that, but have have a good synergy because a lot of it is about encouraging collaboration, getting other people into the space, helping with awareness and things like that. So even if you weren't thinking of doing something like starting contracting for collaborative software development, I think it sounds to me like it would be completely reasonable to have a Zephyr project group devoted to something like this.
Cool. Maybe Bill or Caitlin, I was just curious. Obviously, if we were going to go the route of building a model at some point, maybe it would be something we could talk with you all about, and even your foundation. What you call it, the MPORF, is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate acronym. Yeah, I do think that this project is significantly different in that Activity Sim was built out from the beginning to be open source code, and so that's a distinct difference between the two that I think has major implications in how things could continue.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like the future, I will kick that actually at Bill, since he's in charge of staffing and resources.
Yeah, I mean, Bill, I guess. I was going to say too that maybe it's less of a pooled effort and more like a I don't know, a committee or something at MPO. At first, at least.
Sure, right. And so to that point, yeah, we don't currently have sort of a standalone socioeconomic modeling working group or effort, if you will. That's certainly something that would be a lot easier to stand up than kind of a larger pool fund effort in the short term. And we're happy to have those discussions following today if that's something that there's enough interest in. We're certainly a little concerned about bandwidth at the moment. We're Caitlin and I have a problem of saying no. That being said, that is not me saying no right now here today. So I would be happy to follow up offline and see what that might look like if there's enough interest. As far as kind of medium to long term and standing up perhaps a pooled fund effort specific to your needs, I would just echo what's already been said in terms of a champion. Activity Sim wouldn't be where it is today without folks like Lisa and Guy and Joe and the others that are on the phone with us here today. And so I think really identifying that core group of champions right from the get-go is critical. to be able to kind of get it to a place where Activity Sim happens to be today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it sounds like I haven't been doing the socioeconomic modeling for all that long, but as I got into it and as I started asking people about, you know, when we were exploring a model for a land use model and whatnot, people kept talking about the mini conference that Sandag and MAG would put on, and it's great that there's such a community there already. I was kind of coming from a travel modeling world, which is, you know, interrelated but somewhat distinct, and I always found that that community was incredible. I thought, as far as you look at TMIP and you look at you know, the listserv and how there's some real like in-depth conversations going on by email, which is kind of an older communication mechanism now, but you know, it's definitely an active community, and you have these DRB committees that are very active doing regular conferences. You have you know, I think Activity Sim kind of, and even Zephyr sort of, are things that come out of all these similar groups that are talking to each other, but it also winds up being very difficult because it's sometimes the same people doing all these different groups, right? And so the bandwidth piece is very real. I mean, I sit on the CTPP board with some people that are on the call, and it's this whole thing of these volunteer efforts, you know, and how much do you have that champion? How much do you have people with energy and really time who already have their day jobs and commitments to really keep something moving forward that maybe a lot of people believe in, but it's just how do you keep it alive and keep it moving forward? So I think that that's always going to be a struggle, and something I hear in all your presentations. Tara, you know, I think I was thinking back to when I first met you at a peer exchange in Vegas, I think it was, and you know, I think that these efforts really happen a lot when people get together, and when they're like, oh yeah, you're just like me, you have the same issue and everything, you know, and it's so cool to hear and to gather, whether it's virtually or in person, to have those efforts. And I know you touched upon it a little bit, but maybe could you say a little bit more about what Vision Valley is doing on the peer exchange efforts over the years, and how to get users talking to each other and that sort of thing?
Right. I think I feel like that's still a untapped area for us. We do have a number of users, and a number of those are kind of moving up to, you know, really kind of get their head around what they've got and apply it so that they can think about the next step. So I think early on we had some really good peer exchange. That's where I met you, which was prior to the Vision of L developing. I don't know that we've had a ton of those, and we've talked about them, and then COVID hit. So I think we're like right at the cusp of doing more on that front. We've done a lot in a technical world, which has just been phenomenal, and we couldn't have done that without Jeremy's help to rope that in, and that needed to have that foundation. But now I think we have a solid base that a lot of people are starting to use, and so I would like to get to that point of sharing more. So, you know, we've had kind of, I would say, sort of not even very formal, but a structure that where we have some core users and they kind of guide, and then they go back to like maybe a more quarterly meeting with the big group of people. And, you know, then there's a peer that's like technical level, and they were in the weeds with the consultants. So, you know, I think the conversations have been a little fractured, and not so much of like a sharing of what we're doing and those common problems. It's been more like we are in our own little silos, and then we come together and say we'd like this in the tool, because it's been more of a technical conversation. So I'd be curious what Jeremy thought. I've actually encouraged FHWA to bring someone alongside Jeremy that might be more of a planning hat and connect to some of the planning efforts.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, the emphasis there, Tara, I mean, it's not so much the fact that we don't have somebody with a planning hat as it really has been, you know, what's been the focus of the project. And I think what we've really been trying to ramp up through the pilot projects we've been doing at Washington DOT, Virginia DOT, that we're helping out with other MPOs, is trying to develop the resources. So a big piece of our next pooled fund push is to really bring the documentation together, get this in place so it's clear soup to nuts what people have to do. And I mean, the things that we've got on the pipeline include really detailed analysis of where the inputs come from, what they mean, how which ones you develop as part of scenarios, which ones you develop and extrapolate from existing data resources. We've been developing scripts at the Volpe Center to help facilitate that. And while all of that is very technical, the conversation ultimately about how to use these tools has really also revolved, and we're going to have to ramp that up at some point from agencies like UOT and ODOT, from ARC, from others who have made use of this, to really start developing the use cases and an understanding of, Vision Eval as a conversation facilitator. We can use it at the level of planning staff. We can use it to speak to policy boards. We can use it to speak to the public. There are examples of all of those things, and coming up with some better guidance for this is there. One of the research initiatives we're trying to look at Federal Highway is to enlarge. We've really been stagnant in pushing scenario planning and the documents that we produce for that. And we're going to be going back and doing a more systematic review and analysis of tools that people can use to support strategic and scenario planning. Vision Eval obviously will figure in that. There are other ones as well. And the idea is to help people situate this tool in the planning process. And I think this gets precisely to your point, Tara, that people are still trying to figure out what's this for. We did have a question in the chat about network availability, and people, it's sort of like, well, Vision Eval doesn't do trips. It does households. I mean, this is what's actually being modeled there. The VMT is a characteristic of the household, not a characteristic of the individual trips we make. We build this up and analyze the shifts and changes in different ways. That's a mindset shift for people. And I think it makes a lot of sense for how we do, particularly the early stages and long range planning. And I think it's something that intersects, in my experience, with how land use planning is done and forecasting, what the considerations are that we want to go through. It's far less about the transportation infrastructure and far more about socioeconomic goals, demographic shifts and changes, things that we need to respond to. So that's my brain dump on all of that stuff. And I'll just say, keeping all these balls in the air and trying to move it effectively forward has been, very challenging. I'm actually very satisfied with a lot of the progress we made, but it's really clear that, over the next year or so, we really need to bring some of this stuff home so that the tool is, practically speaking, more accessible, more obviously applicable at particular phases in the planning process. So I'll stop on that.
I think there was a good comment in the chat from Tim Reardon that I think that was a really good place when we finished up our pooled fund sort of contract, and now we're opening another one to sort of understand, well, what do we need? And we actually did a bunch of case studies of 4 or 5 people saying, here's how I use it, right? Which I think demonstrates Jeremy's point, like, where does it fit? Like, how are different people using it? And then it was like, oh, you got a 3-cent VMT tax covers your, oh, I got a 4, like you start to actually compare what inputs, and that helps you to sort of justify what you're doing is working and realistic relative to others. So I think there's no substitution for that kind of sharing of what you're doing, which also kind of exposes the warts too. So you don't necessarily want to bring everybody into those meetings. So you need that forum that's sort of safe to share and understand the tool positives and negatives. And I'd like to have more of that.
Nice. I wanted to hear a little bit more from our webinar attendees, just to get a sense of what your questions are for our presenters and thinking about for our own group going forward, and sort of next steps or things you're interested in seeing as we evolve. But and I was going to say, I did see in the chat a number of different questions, but I think a lot of times it was more specific to the presenter and the tool itself, and less so on this more conceptual thing of drawing lessons and seeing where we're going. So I was just wondering if there's anybody attending that had some questions for our presenters, or things you're thinking about just that you want to share. Don't jump at once, there's Mark. He's raising his hand like a dutiful guy who you're running the show basically, and you're still using the hand raising.
Well, I had to search for it. I don't think I've ever actually used it before, Ben.
Yeah, I find unmute a lot quicker than I find the hand.
And yeah, I was trying to type this in the chat too, but maybe I'll try this route since I got a window. I guess one thing I was encouraged about was hearing in all three kind of presentations this kind of common thread that a small group came together somewhere in person over, drinks after a conference in some other way, and kind of came up with this kernel of an idea that then grew into something bigger. And obviously, it's not that easy. You're not just planting it in the ground and watering it occasionally. There's a lot of work that happens between those two stages. And then what Tara said just now, the idea that you've got a success story, a practical implementation that you share back, and that even helps build that momentum. Just curious if there's some advice that all the presenters would share, that you've gotten together, you've bounced ideas off each other and you really love this idea. I can probably think of it at least a half a dozen times I've had that moment occur, over my kind of time here. And then what? What's the great advice for kind of taking it from stage A to stage B? How often are you approached with these type of ideas? And what do you see kind of in the more successful pitches that you get?
Well, I can take a stab at that first. As far as advice or recommendations I would give to the group for taking this to that next level, what I've seen be really successful, I know we've hit on it multiple times, but you really can't overemphasize the idea of the champions. And even among that small group, there has to be one leader, right? Leading by committee does not work all that well. You really have to have, one point person within that core group that is willing to dedicate time and effort towards herding cats and keeping everybody on track. I find initiatives that choose that one person, like elected from within their group, those tend to be the most successful. Otherwise, you tend to have meetings where you all sit around and stare at each other and nobody really sets direction. I'm sure all of us have been in those meetings within our own respective agencies. So I would say that's incredibly important. And then I think also finding ways, central areas or central repositories for information. So when I came into this project, was blown away by ActivitySim's organization on GitHub, because it's not just the code repository. It has the meeting notes and the agendas and the scopes, and every project document you can think of is out on GitHub. And so having that central repository is phenomenal. I think every project needs something like that, whether you use SharePoint or OneDrive or online things like Jira or Trello. Whatever it is you use, finding something to bring the larger group together and have that central repository, and also making use of it, not sending emails with updated whatever, saying I'm posting it here, go take a look. And I think that's a habit that's really hard to break for folks. But I worked on several large projects where you're hunting through your email trying to find up to date, what did so-and-so say about that, and where, and is this the, what is the authoritative source, right? Having that one version of truth is important. So finding that central repository to include not just things like code and technical stuff, but also meeting notes and documents that provide direction. And then finally, I would say, really making sure that the group comes together on a shared mission or vision. That's super important as well, to make sure that you're setting course. And y'all might find, individual routes to get there that are unique or distinct to your regions. But making sure that you're all pulling in the same direction is probably the last one. And that might actually be the hardest, I think, out of everything I listed, bringing together a group this large around a common vision.
Jeremy, you want to chime in?
Yeah. I'll chime in here for a little bit, because I think, we've got obviously we have a GitHub. Actually, we have several of them, and this is part of the problem. that, you know, because of the lineage of the Vision Eval project, I mean, it's been an ODOT project, it's been an AASHTO/SHARP2/Federal Highway project, it's been the pooled fund, it's been moved forward by academics, it's been moved forward by contractors. ODOT, even though they're in the pooled fund, is funding research on the side. Everybody's doing their own thing with it. And so one of our huge challenges has been, how do we keep roping this back? And I mean, one of the questions we haven't fully and satisfactorily answered is, what is, quote unquote, Vision Eval the product? I mean, you know, it's owned in different places. I mean, I do work on the code base and I'm a federal employee doing this on federal time. There's no copyright, you know, which is actually, nobody can assert copyright over that. But then other pieces of it are copyright ODOT, copyright, you know, whoever. And so the point about having somebody who's, or several somebodies in our case, who are visionaries, who see this product going forward for their own purposes, and I would say all of our active participants are in that place. Everybody comes with their own agenda. And part of the challenge of the pooled fund has been aligning that and figuring out, okay, what exactly are we pooling and what exactly is the pooled result that comes out of there? And I think we're all united around Vision Eval that one of the key goals, I mean, is we're each here individually because we have seen value in the tool and think that it's something that could be transformative for you know, land use, transportation planning, related things like that. And we want to see other people pick it up and use it because it's a vindication of this, you know, vision that we have about, boy, the whole world and the planning environment would be better if we got this to happen. And I think that's, you know, so there's been this sort of almost crazy, you know, personal passion thing that's driving almost everybody who's involved in the project. And yet we still had to work this down to, okay, we're doing this piece, somebody else is doing that piece. I'd say that a fair amount of my time managing the project is trying to figure out how to reconcile pieces that are being pursued separately by people for the same goals, and can we bring this back to one thing? And so, I mean, you know, this is, you know, an effect of the history. It's an effect of who's interested in the project. You know, there is a diversity of purpose in all of these cases that we're trying to make cohesive sense out of. But it's like, it's a very challenging and interesting thing. And I think, but what underpins it, and I think this gets back to Caitlin's point, is that it does take individuals who are visionaries, even if it ends up being a pool of us, you know. I mean, you know, the band of the founding brothers or whatever it is back in terms of how the US Revolution happened and the Constitution and all of that stuff. Everybody comes with their own agenda, and it's all about trying to establish a workable process where concrete, valuable things happen without everybody just deciding to take their marbles and go home. So that's our big challenge. And so far, knock on wood, I think we've actually been pretty successful with it. And I'm hoping that we'll take a significant leap on that in the next year. Anyway, I'll stop.
Thanks. No, Tara, I'm going to go with you, and then Tim, want to say something?
Right. I just want to kind of echo a slightly different way that what I've heard here from Caitlin and Jeremy. One, I think you have to figure out what you can do over the next year. And that's that common page. I had a Venn diagram that said we want to do certain technical things and we want to do certain sort of policy communication things. And it was like, what could we do in the next 2 years? It was our 26, 27 activity one pager. And, you know, on the side, we're like, here we can get a little bit of money from this AASHTO peer exchange that we can get people at, and we can do ODOT partners will give this and other partners will do that. I mean, it was like, here's all the funding, but here's the things we think we can accomplish. And we kept coming back to those. So it's this common vision. And then somebody has to spend the time. And I think at the beginning, it was probably me being the one person, bringing everybody back. This is what we decided to do. That's great. We can put that on like next year. But right now, this is all the bandwidth we have, and we have to keep moving forward. And, you know, so that's a herding of the cats. And I'm trying to hand that off to Jeremy a bit more as my job has changed as well. So you have to have that champion that can spend some FTE time doing it. To do it, but I think you also have to decide this is what we're going to do and what we're not going to do in the first couple years till you can get something solid and keep building and do, you know, all the things you want to do.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, as I listen to the conversation, I think that, you know, there's a distinction between the activity sim the vision eval work, which is really focused, which is very product focused and has a specific, there's a product and a code base and a roadmap that folks are working on. And that's like one model. And, I think what we have here is a community of practice, which is maybe a little more akin to the sort of, which seems to be a little more affinity to the Zephyr kind of model, which is supporting lots of people who are doing lots of different things in different realms and elevating those that are sort of really advantageous and so forth. And, I was thinking about this, and then I saw David's, comment in the chat, and sort of prompted me to raise my hand, which is, do we want to move towards sort of unified or sort of single preeminent products for doing the kind of socioeconomic forecasting work that we do? I mean, there are some, and I've been interested in a long time in an urban sim, sort of more of a user community. I mean, that's different because that's not open source in the same way that activity sim. That's not, again, that's like a third model. But I struggle with seeing how the diversity of regions that we have and sort of the diversity of like socioeconomic modeling questions that we all face, knowing everybody over the last few years, like is amenable to like, let's work on a single tool that's going to help do this, and let's develop a product roadmap for something that's going to do it. Whereas activity sim is like, hey, we're your new travel model, and it could do that. And so that's where I struggle with this. I'm on the side of like, I love the community of practice, right? And I like hearing what people are doing and capturing that and trying to incorporate it into the work that our team does. And that seems more, like I said, that's more affinity to the Zephyr model. But I think that's a question that we need to grapple with here in terms of determining like how we want to continue to organize and make this forum more robust, which is something I'm 100% in favor of.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and it's a good distinction. I think in some ways, I think Activity Sim came out of a community of practice in a lot of ways after a lot of years of a pretty robust community of practice, and look what came out of it. I think that's a great story. And so it could be something down the road for us, but it also, I think, is really jumping the gun as far as we need to create more of a community of practice in some ways, I think. Bill, did you want to still chime in?
Sure. Yeah, I was gonna be a little punchy here late in the day on the East Coast and say that patience and flexibility were certainly something that we had to learn from the beginning. We've been at this since 2013, and as with anything new, there were some bumps in the road along the way, and we learned and we pivoted and we were able to keep moving in the right direction. I'd also just say organizing sort of a governance structure was really important for us. And really, as Caitlin mentioned in her presentation, defining kind of what is the end goal, what is the mission, what are our principles. Joe always likes to joke that Activity Sim is not a Ferrari, it's a Honda Accord. And so there was sort of a general agreement that's, we weren't trying to build the most flashy thing out there. We really wanted to build something of quality that people would be able to depend on and use. And so once everybody was able to kind of coalesce around that and we were all moving in the same direction, it really set us up for success. So wanted to share those couple of thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, Tara, why don't you share, and then I think we're gonna look at wrapping up, and so go ahead.
Sure, and I guess I would just say, I wonder if Zephyr isn't the place for all of us in some ways, like it could be a community of practice and we have tools elsewhere, right? So I don't know, I've often looked at that, and Zephyr's still new. I think we've thrown this out, Lisa, with you before, but I think we're still, we had a very similar peer sharing back in Portland at that TRB planning applications a few years back, and we presented some of the similar conversations, and none of us, we're all still evolving, right, as to how this works. So you can help us as well. But I think the community of practice is needed for all of these tools we're talking about, and we're all kind of doing it differently, and I would say at various degrees of success.
No, I mean, and go ahead, Lisa. Yeah.
Oh, I would just say this all makes sense, and it's funny because a lot of the instigators were sort of involved in both. Like David Ori was very involved in both Activity Sim and in Zephyr, and I think that Activity Sim was just sort of more advanced in its timeline in that the sort of quintessential what are the features of an activity-based model were sort of becoming more standardized and ready to start on that sort of joint contracting thing. But it has been a very long timeline. You know, Activity Sim has been in development for a while now. And, you know, and even though we were a founding partner, we have not moved it into application for ourselves yet, although we are now finally have a plan in place to do that. But it's going to be for Travel Model 2, even though Activity Sim actually was pivoting off of Travel Model 1. So it has been a long road. And it's interesting that I think that's true. And a lot of the folks involved sort of have come to Zephyr for, I think Zephyr almost is like a pre-Activity Sim venue for like maybe smaller scale things which have less funding. I mean, I feel like with Zephyr, we are trying to solve some of these problems of like implementing the same things over and over again. Like to me, that's just kind of the most frustrating thing is like, can we convalesce around tools? And Activity Sim happens to be a big enough tool and sort of standardized enough that we were able to sort of like get into the contract with the annual, you know, commitment and everything. Whereas like the general network standard and the tools around those is still, you know, it's still kind of in its more of its infancy. And so that's why I think it makes sense to be in Zephyr, because it's harder to convince agencies that they need to like put a set amount of money towards it in any kind of a sort of a regular way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No,
just I don't know if that clarifies it all, but
no,
they're related for sure.
I was going to say, I agree. You know, I think we all are kind of in this wider community of practice, and if nothing else today, I think it's great just to get some time just getting more familiar with each other and the tools people are using, and gives different folks different ideas of where to go going forward. But it's really really great to have this sharing and this exchange, and I really appreciate the time of our presenters today. I'm gonna pass it back to Mark, and maybe we can wrap up. Sorry, he didn't know I was gonna do that.
No, I did not. So winging it, other than just echoing what you just said, Ben. My thanks as well. I loved this last 30, 45 minutes of discussion. You know, it was really good, really valuable, inspiring, great lessons learned. It's great to kind of see navigation points. And I totally agree, kind of, Tim, with some of the comments you were making. There's multiple ways to do this and multiple models for us to potentially follow. So thanks again, everyone. We will be back. We're going to try to lay something out, like I said, in January. This planning group is going to continue to meet. And if you're interested in being part of that, just reach out to me. I can hook you up, or Maggie, I think, has been the other person kind of coordinating the email lists. Thanks again. Wish everyone all the best for the rest of 2021. Hope to see you at some point between now and then. And if not, I hope to see everyone back in January 2022 when we pick up this webinar series again. Also, reach out to me. We've got a short punch list of ideas that we could start picking up again in 2022 for these webinars, but there's no end to the things that we could talk about probably in our profession, especially with the challenges that we're facing. So everyone, thanks.